Thank you, Joe. I do owe you. I try to not give those big words that are difficult to pronounce. You did a good job tonight. We believe that we make a difference. If we didn't believe that, why would we be here? We believe that God is able to make a difference through us. If we didn't believe that, why would we be here? The teachers that teach our children and our grandchildren, they believe that they're making a difference in the future of the church, but also in the future of our grandchildren and children's society. Or else they wouldn't do that. And then we've got those school teachers, or used to be school teachers. They taught and spent a lot of time teaching children because they believe that they are going to make a difference. Hannah, I haven't spoken a lot on Sunday nights when I've been going through the Old Testament and talking about the power of one and how one can make a difference. Hannah is probably not one of those that we would put at the top of the list. The question is, can a woman change the direction of a nation? Can a mother really make such a difference? Hannah did. That last part of the sentence that Joe read about how that Hannah's, I don't know what you'd call her, sister-in-law, because she's the other wife of her husband. I don't know what you'd call her, but Peninnah kept troubling her and kept bothering her in order to irritate her. They must be related to my children. My children have been known to do that, and sometimes my grandchildren do. I want to speak briefly tonight about Hannah. Sometimes we will say things when we are in deepest despair. When we really want God's intervention, we'll make a vow. Hannah made a vow. The important thing about Hannah is she followed through. She didn't just make a vow. I want to talk about Hannah as being a distressed wife. I didn't know what else to say. I thought the word distressed was just really appropriate. And I wonder how many of you wives have ever been distressed. Probably maybe one or two of you. Just today. Just today. She was childless, as the verse says, that God had closed her womb. She had no child, and that really was the foundation for Peninnah acting so ugly toward Hannah. She had no children. Of course, the idea is if you're faithful to God, God's going to give you children. But that's not always necessarily the case, because God knows what's best and God has a plan, and not every woman is intended to be a mother according to God's plan. And not every man is intended to be a father according to God's plan. And so then, in verses 4 through 7, not just 6, 4 through 7, whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her. And the Lord had closed her womb. And because the Lord had closed her womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Well, that didn't help the situation. Most of you don't know what it's like to grow up with a twin. It's not an easy thing, is it, Corey? Corey's a twin. Except Corey's twin brother probably looks more like him than mine looks like me. It's not easy growing up. They really get under your skin in a way that a younger brother or an older sister just can't. I know. And I used to let my twin brother push me around until one day I got tired of it and I got down on top of him and on top of the ground, and I put my knees into his biceps. And I said, if you don't stop, I'm going to pound you into this ground. I wasn't a Christian. I was just 13. And he never troubled me again. I should have done that sooner. But he never troubled me again. And I guess part of it was my fault because I let him push me around until then. Hannah's one of those that's been pushed around and kicked around, and it's happened year after year after year. What do? You talk to God about it. In verses 12 through 14, as she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli, now this is the father of Hophni and Phinehas, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, How long will you keep on getting drunk? Get rid of your wine. Boy, talk about being distressed. Not only did Peninnah distress her, not only was she distressed from the fact that she didn't have children, but now Eli, the priest, the prophet, is on her case. She can't buy a break. She can't get a break anywhere. Well, does a person have to pray verbally to be heard? You know, in 1 Timothy chapter 1, not chapter 1, but 1 Timothy chapter 2, the Bible talks about prayer. And it says, I urge then, first of all, that requests, prayers, and intercession and thanksgiving be made for everyone, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. This is good and pleases God our Savior, who wants all men to be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. Why would we pray to God? Because we know He can change things. He can change the hearts of husbands. He can change the hearts of children. He could change the hearts of parents. He could change the heart of a king. He might even be able to change the heart of a president. God has the power. God has the ability. I remember a lady the same age as me from Andover. This was many, many years ago. She wanted to know, when are we going to allow women to pray publicly? And I said, well, in 1 Timothy chapter 2, Paul told Timothy, I want men everywhere to lift up holy hands in prayer without anger or disputing. She said, yeah, but I want to pray publicly. I said, you can pray publicly. I can? I said, yes, just keep to yourself. She said, no, I want to be heard. I said, well, God would hear you. No, I want to lead the congregation. I said, well, then you're asking for something that God will not allow you to have, because that's not your place. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3, 1 Corinthians chapter 14, and 1 Timothy chapter 2 talks about that women are remain silent in the church, that are not allowed to speak in 1 Corinthians 14. And that word speak is the Greek word lalein, which means to teach. They're not allowed to teach. They're not allowed to have that position in the Lord's church. That's up to a man. But yet here we see Hannah being chastised by a prophet because she was praying for a child. Second thing, we want to look at the fact that she was a faithful believer. In verses 9, 10, and 11 1 Samuel. Once when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. In bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord, and she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. This almost sounds like a Nazirite vow. God, if you will do this, I will do this. When we had our children, it seemed like that one of them was more accident prone than the other two. And now that Amanda has her 3 children, it doesn't seem like, but one is more accident prone than the other two. And so when he wants to go outside and play, we want to kind of wrap him up with that bubble wrap stuff and not let him touch anything. Because he had this thumb all wrapped up where he burned it, holding it over a candle. I'm not going to tell you what he was doing. It's none of your business. But he's just accident prone. Boy, I'll tell you what, we know how to pray when our children are hurt. We know how to pray for their health. And here, I don't know what it's like. I do not know what it's like to pray for a child. Because we could mention the word child or pregnancy, and we quit mentioning that after 3. Because for us it was very simple. For Hannah it was not simple. But she made this vow and she prayed to the Lord. And in this passage, Eli, after she said, "No, Lord," verse 15, "I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I'm not drunk like you've accused me. I've not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief." And Eli answered, "Go in peace, and may the Lord, the God of Israel, grant you what you have asked of him." And she said, "May your servant find favor in your eyes." Then she went away and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Early the next morning, they arose and worshiped before the Lord, and then went back to their home in Ramah. Elkanah lay with Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel, saying, "Because I asked the Lord for him." I'm going to speak about Samuel, Lord willing, next Sunday night. Samuel was one of the great prophets of the Old Testament, although he doesn't live a great long time. And he's not presented in the way that Elijah is presented. But there's a comparison between Samuel and Moses. And there are many parallels between Samuel and Moses. And we'll talk about that later. But here is a woman who in the course of time had one child to begin with, gave him to God, and changed a nation. Who was it that was the prophet when Israel asked for a king? Samuel. Who was it that ordained Saul? Samuel. Who was it that ordained David? Samuel. She changed the course of a nation by having one boy and dedicating him to God. Do we think that God won't help us change a nation by dedicating our children to God? Now, we're not going to have people come and bring them down front and have some kind of dedication ceremony. That's not been done in the New Testament. We dedicate our children to God by the way we raise them, by the way we teach them, by the way we teach them and lead them and bring them to worship. Ephesians chapter 6 and verses 1 and 2 talk about children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with the promise, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. What better place to bring up Samuel than at the feet of Eli? Because Eli's two sons, we're going to find out, are worthless. They're disastrous. They bring a terrible reputation and reproach upon Israel because of what they do. And so then, in chapter 1, verses 24 through 28, after he was weaned, talking about Samuel, Hannah, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. When they had slaughtered the bull, they brought the boy to Eli, and she said to him, As surely as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him, so now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there. What a wonderful statement. For his whole life he's going to serve God. He will worship the Lord. In chapter 2 and verse 18, But Samuel was ministering before the Lord, a boy wearing a linen ephod. Each year his mother made him a little robe and took it to him when she went up with her husband to offer the annual sacrifice. Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife, saying, May the Lord give you children by this woman to take the place of the one she prayed for and gave to the Lord. Then they would go home. Look at verse 21. And the Lord was gracious to Hannah. She conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord. These stories are not just stories. According to the Bible, these are real-life events. This happened. And according to the process, we see God's hand in all of it. We've heard, I don't know how many times, of a woman being barren. Abram's wife, Sarai, was barren. We've heard it over and over again, and there have been other women too. And somehow God takes the circumstance and He brings forth a child who will make a difference. How will your children make a difference? How will your grandchildren? If you think you're done raising kids because your kids are out of the house, grandchildren come along and you get to help raise them too. You get to point them in the direction that they need to go in. So the bottom line is, the power of one woman changed the course of the history of the people of Israel. Now it's up to you to decide whether it's good or bad, but the thing is this: you are here to make the same difference. Maybe not in the same way, but you're here to make a difference. The Lord needs us to rise up, and He needs us to love each other, and He needs us to love others. This morning, there was a young man and his wife and daughter came in, and they sat right over there about where Joe and Janet are sitting. Cody and Casey Morton. I met Cody about 12 years ago when he was still in high school. Well, no, 31. No, it had been 15 years ago because he was 16 years old playing basketball for Mulvane High School. His father and I have somewhat become friends. They're members of the church in Newton, Kansas. As I was talking with Cody this morning, when he first came in, I mistook him for somebody else, and I said, "Look around, I know this is your church home." And there's probably a lot of faces that have changed over the years. And I was thinking he was somebody else. And then I realized that he was John and Debbie Morton's son, Cody Morton. So afterwards I went up to him and I talked to him and I said, Cody, I remember you and I have to apologize because when I first saw you again today, I thought you were somebody else, and that's why I said, I hope that this church home reminds you of home and we want you to find a place here. And he said, oh, that's all right. When are you going to baptize me, was his question. I don't think I've ever been asked a question like that. I said, we need to get together and here's my number and you call me. So I'm hoping he calls me pretty soon. He's 31 years old and he grew up in the Lord's church, but he's not been baptized into Christ. He's a good young man. He's a good young father. I'm sure he's a good young husband most of the time. But my concern above all that, just like all of your children, we want our children to grow up into Christ. We really do mean that when we ask the question, what is true success? It's not money. It's not a title. It's not a position. It's going to heaven. That's success on every level. Glad you're here tonight. Hope you'll think about Hannah and Samuel. Hope you'll think about Samuel because that's who's going to be preached about, Lord willing, next Sunday night. Because people do make a difference, and you're here to make a difference. If there's somebody else here that maybe is ready to make that statement, I need to be baptized too. When can I call you? I'll give you my number too. Because we need to take care of this before it's everlasting too late. But if there's somebody here, and maybe you've been... When I got to my house today, I found a bag. And in it was all kinds of different things, and it was called pig feed. And it was on my counter, and I thought, they're not sending this home for me. I'm not a pig. So I had to ask my grandchildren, what is this? Thank you for whoever sent that home. It made me think. Because in the pig feed was candy bars and stuff. Now you can smile at that. I am. But I didn't eat one. Folks, if you're in the pig pen of life and away from home, come home. If we can pray for you, we certainly want to. We want to get to heaven together with you. If we can assist you, come walk.